Welcome to the Fit for Success podcast. Brian Semling is an experienced entrepreneur with over 25 years in business. He is the founder and CEO of Blitz Innovation. He has built several brands such as Brian's Toys, a collectible toy business, to several Amazon FBA brands like Strictly Bricks and Clever Creations. His latest adventure is Rovux, a modern athleisure footwear brand which can be found at rovuxfootwear.com. On the podcast, Brian will talk with other entrepreneurs and social media influencers about their entrepreneurial journey, from what it takes to start and run a business to how they may continue to grow their brands and where they see themselves in their businesses in the future. And now, here's your host, Brian Semling.
Welcome to the Fit for Success podcast. I'm Brian Semling. Today, our guest is Anthony Gruppo, International CEO and author. Welcome, Anthony.
Brian, thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. Glad to have you. And you've got a fascinating background and a tremendous amount of experience. I'd love for you to take a couple minutes to just tell us about your background and share with us where you're at today.
Sure. Maybe if you don't mind, before I do that, just a moment about you. I just wanted to take a moment to congratulate you on your success. What a great podcast that you run. And you're that rare breed, Brian, that has actually put into practice, what he talks about and all your success with your businesses. So it's an honor to be on the show.
Hey, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And glad to have you. Love to have discussions, chats like this. It's fun.
Yeah, great. So real quick, I'd rather talk about others than myself. And just quickly, this is an exciting time after, 45 years in the insurance and risk business and having lived all over the United States and helping organizations be successful. Now finishing up my tour in the United Kingdom as the CEO for Marsh Commercial. And now having transitioned to my successor is the time for that reinvention, right? Is now where some people would call it retirement. I have no idea what that means, but I understand reinvention. So it's an opportunity to really start to help charities. And we're talking, we're now going to be starting Gruppo LLC, and where we can help with charities and raise money. Linda and I, my partner, are looking at now funding a foundation and working with supporting organizations that help in areas of autism and also senior care. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, and for our listeners, as we're talking here, you're literally at that transition point. Sounds like we're here at towards the end of March. You've got 2 days left at your current position, and you move on in 2 to 3 days, basically, right? So this is kind of working you at a literally at that point where people think about maybe for decades, and you're kind of here, and really it sounds like wrapping up your professional international CEO career and about to embark on kind of putting all of your interests or efforts, I should say, professional efforts into charitable work and kind of the next step.
No, exactly. Well said. I transitioned to David Bruce, who was serving as my chief operating officer in the United Kingdom, and he'll assume the role of CEO. And, as you and I have talked, Brian, right, succession and perpetuation is so important. So many times leaders don't start thinking about their successor until it's much too late. And we should start about thinking about that the minute we assume any role. And, having lived all over America and helping organizations and then overseas, is that's such a key factor. And there are some people that just hang on too long, right? You're like, okay, it's time. And, you need to open up the door for others. But it's such an important thing.
Well, it sounds like that the transition is going very well, and congratulations on
Thank you.
On I think a very successful career. But as you pointed out, I mean, you're not done yet. You're just reinventing and moving on to the next. So tell us a little bit about your authorship, which is something that is another accomplishment in of itself. And so tell us, you've written 7 books, I believe. So tell us a little bit about those and how you got into writing.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's really probably creating reality. My first book is now over 20 years ago. And it really was a passion and a call from so many people to do it and to tell, my story. I come from wonderful yet humble beginnings, and a lot of that, the guide to personal accomplishment. In fact, my podcast, The Roots of Leadership, and one of my more recent books, Pushers of the Possible, are those stories about people who came from nothing. The odds were against them and ended up being very successful. 6 Degrees of Impact I did with Maneet Tahar, a psychologist, and we talked about what are the really impact zones of leadership, all the way through my most recent that's just been out, The Pen and the Lens. I teamed up with Gemma McCarthy, the British adventurer and photographer who did the photography for the book. And it's my poetry. Right? My publisher said, Anthony, you're 67. If not now, when? We love your poems. Like, let it go, right? Release them. And it's been really well received around the world. So, I donate all my royalties, every penny of royalty to autism. And in fact, we've now reaching out to start authors for autism around the world, other writers that have a charitable desire. And it's just, look, Brian, the world is so small. Right? And as you make contacts on a global basis, there are people that really want to do some amazing things. So that, that's kind of the background of some of the books. Even, as crazy as it sounds, is I did a book with Nick Bollettieri, the international tennis coach, because I wanted to see what happened if you took someone that coached professional athletes and someone that coached business leaders and what the model would look like. Well, it looked pretty identical to each other. So it's been a real diverse writing, and I've just met some key wonderful people along the way.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like you have not held back to just try some different things, from a unique approach of working with a tennis coach, and how does that relate to business coaching, to poetry. And it sounds like you perhaps were not willing to share that poetry until, it sounds like, around age 67 or so. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Because the poetry covers such wide range of area, from racism to women's rights to the circle of life, to a lot of different things, and all of it comes back around to people and what they need to do to lead their lives in a happy and productive state, and their companies. You and I talked about this, right? I'm sometimes a bit saddened when you see some of these self-professed leaders out there that are coaching or giving guidance to people, but they never did it themselves. They never were in the trenches. They never did the hard yards.
Yeah.
And they're theorists versus practitioners. So, like when I talk to you, right, you start 3 to 4 different businesses. You started out of high school. You have this great trajectory of risk and bold moves. But then I see people following sometimes the wrong role models. And I just encourage people to check the pedigree and the track record before you're coached or led by some of these individuals.
So you shared with me that you've got some tips and techniques that you think are sometimes overlooked or not as known as they should be. So why don't you take a few minutes to share those
Sure.
with us?
No, glad to. I could be pretty quick and succinct about this. I'll break it down to 6 kind of impact zones that the listener can apply in their everyday life and careers. When you think about the first one of leadership, a lot of times people fail to understand that you don't have to have burnout, work and spikes, sacrifice life balance for your career, that they are intertwined and can be welded. And I would say to listeners, first thing is ask what kind of leader do you want to be? Now, it took me decades to understand in my career that the role of servant leader was the most important thing. To take myself out of the agenda, to think about those I served. And when I was in the UK, 3,000 employees, 45 different locations, and multiple countries, right? You think about Scotland's very different than Wales. Wales is very different than England. England's very different than Northern Ireland. And you think about, as a leader, how do you serve thousands of people and their families? So I would say the first impact is, what kind of leader do you want to be, and how are you going to help others? The second thing is really the resources around you, is to look at the internal and external resources that you have available and make use of them. You and I have seen it as entrepreneurs that sometimes they have great vision, they have great energy, but they don't have a lot of resources around them. I'm not just talking about cash. They don't have some of the people around to handle operations or different things, and they get in a quagmire. So think about internal and external resources and your strategic position. What is the plan, the goals, the objectives, the strategies, the actions, the tasks? And it's not just a boilerplate plan off the internet. It's a strategic plan that's got real quantifiable goals, people that can help you with that, not put your name next to every goal and objective, and don't overwhelm yourself with that strategic plan. If you think then about the outcomes, if you think about, the outcomes won't come to you as a leader in an organization or entrepreneur, and whether you have 12 people or 1,200, it's the same issue, is that you need to have that research and development. What are you constantly researching and developing that is for today and tomorrow? If you can see it, you can have it. The visionary every day can manuscript a landscape, right? Create the reality to how it can look. But you need that strategic position and the strategic plan to clearly define it. And then what kind of outcomes do you want to achieve? What, types of, for your family, yourself, those you look after. Brian, I would say in summary on this, that I use the UK as an example. As an American CEO, when you go to a foreign country, everything's different. Where you buy your food, where your flat is, the map of the tube, right? Everything is completely different. But what isn't different is the hearts and minds of the people. So before I spent any time with my senior executives and councils, I traveled the countries meeting people that were doing all the tasks, all the jobs that help you and them be successful. And then I listened to the senior leaders and heard their opinions. Because you and I have seen far too often the leader that comes and just goes into the boardroom or goes into the certain office and only sees the same people and doesn't think about the opinions, the concepts, the ideas of the people themselves. And that's why we were successful. And I would encourage, if the listener does nothing else, it's the resource you have around you and the humanity, the fabric of that humanity that's around you that can help you knit an incredible life.
There's a lot there. That's incredible advice and wisdom that you've kind of put together, or I think figured out over your career, right? So that's fantastic, and some good advice for people who are maybe getting started or maybe midway through their journey, to just think about some of those points. You hit a number of things, but what type of leader do you want to be? And I suppose even if that's a question, like I think you said, some of these things took you decades to figure out, right? So
sure, because as a young leader, you're focused on growth of your family or your own risk taking, and you don't realize early enough that the diversity that's necessary, that you need diversity around you, you need youth around you. And I'll say this to the leaders that are later in their career: look around and see who's around you. They all look like you. Are you really tackling diversity, or is it a punchline on some compliance form? And then at the same time, that will give you a great deal of energy and vision, and also what the people really need and want as we go into hybrid working or whatever it might be. So that's why there's such an energy in business and life right now that before was contained because people were afraid to step outside of that ring that they were comfortable in.
Rovox, where fashion meets fitness.
Are you referring to the pandemic over the last couple of years, or what is it that you're referring to as far as?
I'm referring to that people, when the pandemic ignited it and it made it more visible.
Yeah.
But the leaders that forced their own opinion of how things should be versus listening to the people of how things could be, and they shorten their circle. The greater the risk becomes, they shorten their circle of who they interact with and become actually more invisible, more aloof, and more inaccessible. They say they're communicators, but are you really? So do you really communicate? I remember during the pandemic, I installed in my flat a private phone line that the employees could call in the evening or weekends, and it lit up like a Christmas tree. And that's how I knew, you can force them through HR. You can say, well, there's 3,000 people. How can you possibly handle those phone calls? Well, of course you can. So you get to hear exactly what people are thinking, and it helps you build the foundation of your decision making.
Sure.
But I just see far too many that, they've shrunk their circle, and in turn, they've blinded their vision.
Well, that does sound like an incredible step to cut straight to the, I guess to cut, what would you call it, but the bureaucracy or the barriers between the people and you as the leader, right? So you just made it your phone accessible. Sounds like about 24/7, maybe outside of sleeping hours, perhaps.
I cut it down on weekends. I gave it a window in the evenings and weekends. Yeah.
But you made yourself available, and it sounds like people did reach out to you. Was it that they were typically, were they needing help, or were they just wanting to share? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah. It was a wide range, but I could put it into three zones for you. One is that, are we going to be okay? For example, the Marsh organization made a decision around the world that no colleague would lose their job because of the pandemic. So no one was furloughed, terminated, or jobs eliminated because of the pandemic. So that was one thing. The second thing was really, how would this develop? Because as we started to work from home and other issues, it was that. And the third piece, and probably the most emotional, and the one was that their individual stories, right? Partners that lost jobs, family that died because of COVID.
Yeah.
We were dealing with Brexit at the same time. We had just turned the company to a brand new model. And it was those personal stories that made me understand that as a CEO, it didn't matter that we had 3,000 employees, because every decision that we made affected tens of thousands more. Their families, their immediate loved ones, communities were at risk. So it put more pressure on us, because the more you open yourself up, the more pressure. But pressure is a privilege, isn't it? People say, oh, the pressure, the burn. I'm like, oh, come on, get your head up, square your shoulders, because toughen up. Because the truth is that pressure is a privilege. If you have that pressure in your life, that means you have a privilege that others don't have.
Yeah.
And you're in a game others can't play.
So
instead of crying about it, attack it.
And to clarify, do you mean that you felt the pressure of when you open yourself up directly to, thousands of people potentially reaching out to you? Is that the pressure you're referring to, just the different human emotions that can come through each of those conversations?
Sure, because now you know. Look, as a CEO and senior leader, your jokes are always funny, your clothes are always attractive, and people a lot of times will tell you exactly what you want to hear, because they don't want you to prod deeper into what they're really doing. So let's be honest about that, right? There are underperformers and there are overachievers. The underachiever is going to beat you no matter what. The underachiever, whether they work from home or they work in the office, they're going to find a way to not perform to their passion, potential, and capability, right? They're going to beat you no matter what. People are like, oh, everybody's going to come back in the office. Really? Why? Because that same underachiever is going to beat you anywhere. Then you have those that are just young, some heroes that are doing a good job that nobody knows. So you ask the leader in that line or the other level, do you know Brian? Like, have you talked to Carol? Like, she's got some good ideas. So what it does is it shows the employees that they don't have to fear a chain of command. They're not going to cause chaos, but they're going to be valued. And when you do that from the bottom up, it puts pressure on the leaders to also respond to their people and listen, because they know that they're talking to you and others.
Yeah, you're basically setting the, I was just thinking about this as you were saying it, but basically you're putting pressure, healthy pressure, on your leaders, the people who are the supervisors of the people calling you, or the executives who are maybe a couple levels above the people calling you, to in essence do the same thing, right?
That's right.
Not necessarily to have the phone lit up in certain hours, but at least the general idea that they're reaching out to the people that they are responsible for, and that they're listening, basically, right? Because
that's right. That's right. Well said. Because it's not about the phone line, right? That's a support mechanism, but it's every exchange, every monthly meeting, every one-on-one, we did as a company culture is that on that call with thousands of people on me with a Zoom call or whatever, you can ask anything you want. We never scripted the questions. We never blocked the questions. We never had planted questions. You know, you've seen that, Brian, right?
Yeah.
Leaders that plant the question, the one they want to hear, and just ask whatever you want. It got crazy. Hey, there's some stuff out there. I'm like,
It sounds like
ooh, okay.
your employees could tell it wasn't scripted because it was pretty obviously not scripted. Is that your point? It was
Oh,
real.
sure. Because I did get a question. I'm like, I have no idea how to answer that. Or I just say, no, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
But this
yeah,
again kind of goes to that point of if it's okay for you as the CEO to field all these questions, and it kind of sets the tone for the culture that in a weekly meeting with a group of 20 people, it may be expected that a similar type of questioning might happen at a local office, just for an example, because you're setting the
yes,
tone as the. So that sounds like very, very powerful leadership and very thoughtful. Like you kind of, it starts with kind of that first question that you said, or that, the first, where you said, think about what type of leader you want to be, right? And then that was, I think this kind of is what we're talking through is kind of comes from that, right? So if
yeah,
you be that servant leader and show the transparency, and not only for the people connecting with you and yourself, but really kind of the entire organization, the other leaders, right? Because there's dozens, maybe hundreds of leaders in your organization, with thousands of people, right? It's good to really set the tone for them as well. Well, this has been fascinating. I love chatting about things like this, and I could keep going. I'm sure we're having a great time. We could go on for hours, and I would love it. I want to give you a chance here before we wrap up to just anything that I haven't asked here today that you wish I would have asked, or anything that you'd like to expand on that we haven't had a chance for yet before we wrap up.
no, it's been great, Brian. I would just say this to all the listeners is that you're more ready now than you think. Don't wait to be 100% ready or wait for someone to tell you that you are. You're more ready than you think. You don't have as long as you think either.
Hmm.
Sometimes we sit there thinking that we have plenty of time and you don't. So you're more ready than you think. You don't have as much time as you think. And don't take yourself seriously to the point that you start to choke yourself and your passions. Is to play the game loose, play it light, enjoy it, but attack it.
That's awesome. And of what you just said, like the one that really, I mean, they all resonate with me, but the one that resonates directly with me at the moment is you're more ready than you think. I have two kids. Sonia is 14, a freshman in high school, and my son is a sixth grader.
Hmm.
And they know I started my business when I was 16, and they're like, 11 and 14, and pretty soon here to turn 15 and 12. So I encourage them. I don't push them, right? I mean, I
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
encourage them, and I set the example and so forth. I mean, I'm an entrepreneurial person, and so that kind of rubs off on them to some degree. But I tell them like exactly what I mean. I don't use the words "you're more ready than you think," although I really like those
Yeah,
words. But I tell them like just go try something. It's an experiment. The sooner you get started, the more time you have
yeah.
left to. So my son has really, kind of jumped into this just even in the last week, and he has. I probably shouldn't get into the details of it too much because it's brand new, and he might be a little bit embarrassed about the. But basically, he's building a website, and he is an expert at one of his hobbies, and he's creating in essence, a training plan. Now,
Oh, I love this.
nobody would know where, and he's learned some things from me. I'm like, we deal with consumer goods with most of our
Yeah,
businesses. I'm like, Eric, if you can think of something that that doesn't require freight and fulfillment and cost of inventory, especially when you're 11,
yeah,
that would be
yeah.
great. And so he thought of this, this digital, a training plan, this digital product, and he did
I
it.
love it.
He doesn't really like to read that much, but I've explained to him how like writing is very important as an entrepreneur and business person, and he's been a really good writer. I don't know, I mean, he doesn't read as much as I would like him to, but he's at least read enough to be able to write fairly well at age 11. I have.
He's 11.
This is what I love about him though, is he jumps in, and he's already started like his own YouTube channels and things like that a couple years ago. Hasn't made any money, but he does have, upwards of 1,000 followers and different.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
But he jumped in and and he found a website software called Pix, kind of like a Shopify or something, and he just goes through all the steps of like building the website, getting the URL. He asked some questions, and I'm like, and he's learned things about delegating and hiring people and so forth. And I said, Eric, what you've done with this website so far, I said, you can't really, like, you can hire and so forth once you get this successful to have people help you run it. But I said, starting it, the part that you're doing right now, this is the part you can't ever hire somebody to do. I mean, you can hire someone to do like each part of it, but to hire somebody to put it all together and just plow through it, and to see his tenacity as we're going to bed way too late at night. And he's like, I'm like, we got to get to bed, Eric. You got to get up for school tomorrow. He's like, he wants me to spend 5 minutes or 5 more minutes, looking at his Google ads. And, and it's
fantastic.
So it's incredible. I said, you know what, Eric, I don't know. You might not, it's pretty likely that you're not going to make any sales, or that you'll make just a few sales. You'll lose $1,000 and, and it doesn't work out. Like, that's fairly possible, maybe even likely. But I said, I guarantee you will not lose on this investment. You will learn. If you make money, that's great. You make $1 million, even better. Make a few $1,000s, great. But you're going to learn so much from this that by the time you're 20, there's no chance you're not going to have a successful business. As long as you keep going.
So true.
Right? So anyway, so there's you're more ready than you think, and here's an 11-year-old who's basically taking that to heart. So if you're out there listening and you're older than 11, you don't have a lot of excuses, unfortunately. So no, I love it. And yeah, that's it, because it's great to be prepared, but don't over prepare, right? Because that can go on for years. And
you can often have sloppy success, and it's just as productive or maybe more.
Right. So, well, great, Anthony. It's been
thank you, Brian.
Tremendous having you on here. Is there any website or social handle you want to share with us as far as how to find?
LinkedIn is sure. No, Anthony Gruppo on LinkedIn, and Instagram, AC Gruppo. And honestly, you can email me directly, and I'll respond to everyone. It's anthonygruppo@yahoo.com.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining the show today.
Thank you, Brian.
It's been tremendous. I'm Brian Semling, and this is the Fit for Success podcast.